All right. Brad Lail, brother, welcome to Broadcasting Seeds. A lot of people know you as the mind behind the Awaken podcast, but the people that don't know who you are, could you tell us who you are, what you do, and where people can find you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm the host of the Awaken podcast, and awakening can mean a lot of things for a lot of different people. Some people look at awakening as spiritual awakening. I look at it not only as spiritual awakening, but awakening to everything, awakening to truth, whatever that is. And for me, on my path of discovery, it's been the awakening to truth for, who the real God of this world is, and that's Jesus Christ. And so, again, I think all roads, conspiracy, paranormal, all that stuff leads to Christ. You'll find Christ at the end of every single rabbit hole. And honestly, I didn't start off this show by doing that. I'm a Christian, but I didn't start off, thinking that I was going to talk about all this stuff about Jesus and the Bible and all this other stuff. But as I started getting into it, I'm like, okay, this is where their path is leading me. So that's what you'll hear a lot on my show. I am trying to do more of a scientific take behind it as well, because I don't think that those two things are separated. I think science and spirituality are intertwined. God created science too. So I look at a lot of things with natural sciences, electromagnetic energy, all this other stuff. And I try to couple it with what's being told to us in the Bible. And shockingly, there's a lot of stuff in the Bible that connects to, science stuff that we hear today. You'll hear stuff like Jesus said, Satan fell like lightning from heaven. Like he saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Well, lightning is plasma. And then when you start getting into the plasma stuff, you start understanding that like stars are made of plasma and all this other stuff. So there's a whole biblical cosmology behind a lot of things that people just don't talk about. You don't talk about in church and things like that. So that's pretty much where my path has been. It started off, looking into 33rd parallel stuff. There was a lot of paranormal stuff in my local, where I grew up in the woods that I grew up in South Carolina. And I started trying to make connections all along the 33rd parallel to Roswell and to the JFK assassinations and all this other stuff. And I wasn't satisfied with the answers I was finding. I was finding a lot of stuff, but then I wanted to know more. So then I started looking into electromagnetic energy, like I said, and it turns out that that's what ley lines are. That's what the 33rd parallel is a telluric current that's essentially flowing on top of the earth. And these currents, to science, they call those currents Peterson currents. I mean, the technical definition is telluric currents, but there's a name for them too, and they're called Peterson currents. So there's a Peterson current that flows right through the 33rd parallel. So all those things I started making connections with all those things. And then now I'm exploring science and, like I said, learning about physics and all the stuff that I failed in high school and barely got through college and all that stuff with. So here we are, man.
Yeah,
you can find me at theawakenpodcast.com.
The Awaken Podcast. What's your favorite spot? Like, where do you want to drive people?
Theawakenpodcast.com. Yeah.
Okay.
That's pretty easy. In terms of listening to my show and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Some people they drive people to different platforms. And so there you go. Your website.
The website is pretty easy because there's a lot of different, we always think in terms of Spotify and Apple, but there's Podcast Index and all these other organizations that are great for listening to podcasts, because frankly, I don't trust Spotify and I don't trust Apple Podcasts.
Yeah.
So if you can listen on Podcast Index, that's probably the best way to go. This is the Podfather. What's his name? Forgot the Podfather's name. He was the originator. He's the one who created Podcast
Was
Index.
it Adam Curry?
Yeah. He's the one that created Podcast Index. Excuse me. And so I trust him because it's more of like he decentralized podcasting in a way.
God, I just remember Adam from MTV back in the day.
Yeah, it's funny, man, because I remember seeing his name and I'm like, where do I know this name from? And then you start connecting, like, that's right, he was on MTV. But
yeah, had that hair.
Yeah. Once these people's stars sort of burn out, it's interesting to see how they reinvent themselves. Because I mean, frankly, Joe Rogan kind of was like that too. He was kind of reinventing himself after Fear Factor. He wasn't doing much for many years, and he was doing comedy, obviously, but he wasn't doing much other than that. He wasn't like into acting or anything. He was doing the UFC a little bit, but it hadn't gotten really popular yet. So it's funny how these people start to reinvent themselves after their star sort of burns out and they sort of reignite it into something bigger like that. And it's just interesting. I always feel like God puts people in the places they're supposed to be right at the moment they're supposed to be, because Joe Rogan and Adam Curry and guys like that, they woke everybody up to a lot of stuff, and they showed people that we can decentralize media. We don't have to be a part of, we don't have to follow the mainstream media and be fed a narrative. We can create our own narrative, and we can do our own research, and we can invite each other to each other's shows and share that research. And so yeah, I'm grateful to guys like those. Even guys like Tony Merkel, who took it on a few years after those guys, but he started doing stuff in the paranormal world, him and Blurry Creatures and all these different organizations. And they just took it to a different level. So it honestly, and Sam Tripoli too, because I saw that, oh, Sam's unafraid to talk about this stuff, because at the time I was really afraid to talk about a lot of this stuff. I was afraid that there was going to be some kind of a backlash or some kind of a negative punishment towards me. Maybe my bank accounts would be frozen or whatever the case is. But
Yeah.
once I saw Sam kind of leading the charge and being unafraid, I was like, okay, like I'm unafraid too. Then I'm going to make, and since then, man, we've been pushing back against the mainstream narrative, and I'm excited to see where things are going.
Absolutely. I know when I started the show, it was very Bigfoot centered. But as a Christian, I always saw the links going back to the Bible with all of this, right? And the supernatural, just all of it. And it's funny how all the biggest shows kind of end up going back to the Bible, going back to supernatural beginnings and or the scripture. It's crazy. I just think it's very telling. So
Yeah, it feels like we're headed towards that direction where small towns are making a comeback. This is kind of like an ebb and flow of life. You see, like, I'm from a small town. Small towns are decimated right now. And then everybody went towards the city. Then the cities got too big. Now everybody's coming back towards the country. And then everybody, which means that churches are going to be repopulated again, which means daycares that were not filled with kids are going to be filled with kids in these towns again. So small towns are making a comeback. Churches are making a comeback. But I do think that churches need to reinvent themselves in a way and think about how they talk to people and think about what they're preaching. Because every time I go to church on Sunday, and I try to go just about every Sunday, I find myself wanting more every single time I go. Everybody does. I think it's just not enough to hear faith, hope, and love anymore. I feel like we're in a battle, and people need to be armed with truth and information. And you can ask preachers, what do you think about the Nephilim? And they go, what? There's a lot of preachers who don't even know that there's a whole conversation. There's thousands of people watching shows like ours and Sam's, hundreds of thousands in Sam's case, that are hungry for this kind of information. They're hungry for more Nephilim stuff. Every time Gary Wayne does an episode with anybody, it does amazing numbers on YouTube
blows
and
up.
Spotify and all this other
Yeah.
stuff. So what does that tell you? That tells you that people are very hungry for this kind of information. And that's what we're going to get into today, I guess, fallen angels and portals and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because I had no intentions, again, of really talking about any of this stuff. It's just one of those things where, like, oh, okay, this makes sense and that makes sense. And then you start to see things from a biblical point of view, and you understand that this is why it resonates with people, is because people already kind of sense that. They already kind of know that there's a negative force out there that's shaping the minds of people. They can see it on TV at Super Bowl ads and all this other stuff. They can see it in the music, or they can hear it in the music. And I think people are just at a point now where all they want is truth, and they don't care who that truth comes from. And I think it's a duty of ours, especially that's how I feel about my show,
Yeah.
is that I want to make sure that the information is right. And whenever I put something out, if I'm wrong, if I say something wrong, I try to correct myself. I'll maybe in a different episode, I'll say something about it, but I try to make sure that what I'm putting out is true or close to the truth, So a lot of things that you'll hear are my opinions, but a lot of this stuff is backed up with evidence, like the scientific stuff that I'm always talking about. I don't know anything. I had to go back down I had to relearn protons and neutrons and all that stuff. I'm serious about that, dude. I really don't know anything about this stuff. And so, but I think that's a good thing when you start to, when you're coming at it from a perspective of not being indoctrinated with what the norm is, then you can see things from a totally different perspective. So like if you went to school for science, for physics or whatever, they're going to tell you in school what to think. But when you look at this stuff, like I said, with a high school education, barely graduated from high school, barely graduated from college kind of thing, then you start to see things that maybe other people aren't looking at, or maybe you can raise a question about something that maybe nobody else is talking about. And that's what took me down, like I said, the path of finding out about matter and antimatter. It's like I was wanting to know more. Like, okay, they're demons. Okay, they're aliens. Whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
I call them demons. Where are they coming from? And then I think that's the biggest answer that we all need to start chasing is where are they coming from? And then you start understanding that I had a buddy of mine reach out to me and locally, and he said, I've been listening to your show. He said, man, I'm sorry about that. He said, I'm learning about, he said, you said something about God is light. And he said, that really is like, how come I'd never really looked at it like that before? Like, oh, God is light. And I go, listen, I don't know if I'm right or wrong about this, but it says God is light a lot in the Bible.
A lot.
It's hard to ignore that fact. So if it says God is light, then maybe we need to explore what light is and where it comes from and all this other stuff. So that's what took me down that path of matter versus antimatter, like I said, and seeing that we are matter, we are material, we're made from his image, and that light, that spark of life, that light, that photon is what animates that matter. And so, and again, everything in this universe has the opposite, right? So if you have matter, then you have antimatter. Well, then the antimatter, you have anti-protons and anti-neutrons and all this other stuff. There is a mirrored image of reality that we never talk about. And in fact, I think science is the gatekeepers for that. They don't want anybody to know that there's another side of the coin. There's an upside down, if you will. And I think they purposely try to keep all this information because if you're a scientific minded person and you already know about matter and antimatter and all this other stuff, science will tell you, well, antimatter disappeared and nobody knows what happened to it. And so you just go, well, that's what scientists say.
Yeah.
But did it really just disappear? Like, how do you know it's even there if it just disappeared? And so for me, I started looking at, okay, well, what happens when it goes away? And what's the possibility that it didn't go away, but it's part of the reality we live in? And that's what kind of gave me the idea of like, oh, it helps create our reality. Like the antimatter helps create our reality. And so when you start putting those pieces together, it starts making a little bit more sense, at least in my mind. It might not resonate with a lot of people, but I think it resonates with me a lot. And then as I explore some of this more and more, I start to see that, oh my God, the Catholic Church, for example, and I'm not against Catholic people at all, but I'm just saying that the Catholic Church, for example, they celebrate All Souls Day, or also known as All Saints Day, on October 31st. Well, that's when All Hallows Eve is, and that's when all these other pagan holidays start. There's I can never say the Samhain.
It's like, something like that.
Right? It starts the dark half of the year. This is what All Souls Day is celebrating. This is what All Saints Day is celebrating. It starts the dark half of the year. Well, it says it over and over that God is light. So what's the opposite of light? Dark. So why are you celebrating the season of darkness? Why are you starting off by celebrating the season? And then you look at CERN, and they have a dark matter day, which is also October 31st.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, so like there's some science and there's some religious organizations that are celebrating darkness. And so I'm trying to shed light on that kind of stuff so we can be focused on celebrating light. By the way, the dark half of the year, when did all the drones, the Jersey drones and plasmoids start showing up?
December.
It was November, December. Yeah. And then it faded away around May. And what is May 1st? May 1st is the end of the dark half of the season.
Yep.
It's Beltane. This is Baltane, Baal Tane. This is what they celebrate.
May Day, whatever. There's all kinds of different.
So you start to understand that there's a whole bunch of people in this world who are celebrating darkness in a lot of
Yeah.
different ways. And I'm conflicted about Halloween because I want my kids to dress up and all this other stuff too. But because, you know, growing up, you're like, you see people having church trunk or treats and stuff like that. And you
Yep.
think it's so silly, so ridiculous. Why would some church think that this is but then you start to understand that it's like Protestants in general are like this. This is why we had the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, was because they saw things that were like that was going on. They're like, wait a minute, no, we don't have to celebrate what you're celebrating. That's crazy talk. We just want to celebrate Jesus. And you know, so it sort of separated us from the Catholics, because frankly, the Catholics are doing a lot of stuff like praying to statues and, you know, all this mystic stuff where they're
Yep.
blowing smoke around and all these other different things. And they're sacrificing Jesus every single year. I don't know if people know that.
Yeah.
But what they do for their communion is they pray over the wine and turn it into real blood. They try to transmute it, I think is what it's called, or
Yeah.
something along those lines.
Transmutation. Yeah. Transmute it.
And then, so they're basically rebirthing the blood and making it real, and then sacrificing Jesus essentially again. That's what they're doing over and over. And so that doesn't sit well with Protestants. And that's what the whole Protestant Reformation was about. We like, hey, our God is a personal God. You can look inward and just pray to God. You could talk to God personally and have a relationship with him. And so, again, this isn't against Catholics. You if you love Jesus, we're buddies. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that there are a lot of things in a lot of different religions that we have to be mindful of when we're looking. I mean, it's hard to unthink or undo everything that you've ever known in this world. If you grew up going to any church, Catholics or Baptists or whatever, I think it's healthy to untether yourself from whatever that source is and try to look at things objectively sometimes. Because there's some things in the Bible, even that Jesus is saying, that is up for interpretation.
Yeah.
Right? You know, and I think that, like me, whenever I read stuff about Jesus, I mean, he was the man. He was saying some awesome things. But then when you, like, I heard somebody say, for example, whenever I said God is light, they said, oh, that's just an allegory. I mean, how's that an allegory? It says it a million times.
Right.
Right? It says it over and over and over that God is light. Now, God created the light and the darkness, but remember, he made us in his image. So we are that light portion of that. I didn't mean to kind of carry on here with all this this nonsense that I'm
it kind of brings me into like, well, one of the things we were talking about is fallen angels. So when we talk about darkness, a lot of people think of fallen angels, right? I mean, and when we say fallen angels, frameworks start flying everywhere, like Book of Enoch, Genesis 6, Second Temple writings. You got a whole buffet of stuff, right? So what lens do you use when you're talking about these beings?
Well, it's spiritual lens. It's a Christian lens.
Yeah.
And, you know, it says it in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. And he saw the light was good. And he separated the light from the darkness. He called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So right there, bang. That's Matt. That's that's where the Big Bang started. But see, science will tell you, like, the Big Bang, we don't know what's beyond that. Well, that's because you've been taught to believe that you don't know what's beyond that. But in the early 1900s, the General Education Board, which, by the way, was founded by a Christian and who was John Rockefeller, and all the people he had that made up the board were Baptist preachers. And so if you read the manifesto, whatever it is, of the General Education Board, it's basically saying we don't want thinkers. We don't want people who are spiritual and philosophers and all that. We want workers. We want docile workers. I mean, it's literally saying that kind of stuff. So, you know, when you look at that and you realize, like, they took all the talk of what classical physics used to be was metaphysics. It wasn't like this, because essentially that's what physics is. It's, if you think about it, it's all metaphysics, because you can't really study it. You can't really, you don't have antimatter and all this dark energy and all this stuff to study. So it's all metaphysical. But that's what they talked about for thousands of years before the General Education Board came along. Then they took out talk of the ether and all this other stuff. And then they started making it more like a science. They started calling this stuff science. But again, they took out all these like little pieces of the puzzle, and they have you chasing your tail. Like I said, with the matter and antimatter, they say that matter and antimatter, but they annihilate each other. They keep hitting each other and they annihilate each other. Well, somehow matter gains one extra particle. So if there's a billion particles matter and a billion particles antimatter, somehow matter had 1,000,000,001 and it continued on. And they say that antimatter just disappeared. It just disperses. And they don't really know what happens. But then they have all this other stuff, dark matter and dark energy and all these other theoretical things that they can't explain. So again, that they take that and that's where they draw the line. They say, we don't know what's going on from here, and nobody should ask questions. You should just trust that this is what Einstein said or whoever said for the last 100 years. But thousands of years before that, Aristotle and all these guys were talking about what I'm talking about: the physics, the metaphysics, the dark matter, the dark energy, the ether, all this other stuff. And so I think that the dark matter, so when matter and antimatter annihilate, the repulsion or the explosion that happens when that happens, that is dark energy. And the residue of the antimatter is the dark matter. So I know these terms sound similar, right? Antimatter and dark energy, but it starts off as antimatter, and then it becomes dark matter. The residue becomes dark matter, and then the explosion that happened, it creates a force that pushes that, that it repulses that causes that dark matter to spread out, and that repulsion is called dark energy. So now we have two competing things. We have matter and we have antimatter. Like I said, we have a photon that animates the matter. Remember that matter's anything that has mass and takes up space. So what is mass? And nobody could tell you what mass is. And this is where I try to fill in the blanks with my theory that the mass is the dark matter that came, it's that residue that came from the explosion. So again, the antimatter, the dark energy is what kind of animates the dark matter, and the light energy, which is photons, is what animates the matter. I know this is kind of a minefield of things, and it's probably hard to follow along for a lot of people. Even try to say it, I got to make sure that my words are right, because dark matter, dark energy, all this other stuff. But I think that essentially matter is good, dark matter bad, right? So there's an upside down. They exist, the dark matter exists to create us, essentially. Again, they explode and we get created. They explode and we get created over and over and over. It's a never-ending process. And the universe continues expanding. And I'm not talking about space as in like, Mars and all this other stuff. The space within us, within everything, the space beyond our perception is continuously growing and growing and growing. And I don't think that they like being in that world. So they are trying to come in. Now, some of these fallen angels were created. Now, God created the heavens and the earth and all this other stuff. And then he also created the stars. And the stars were kind of locked in the firmament, and they were designed to sort of watch over humanity. Well, what happened in Revelation 12? The dragon knocked a third of the stars out of heaven. This is where you get the idea of 33 and the fallen angels, the 200 angels that fell to earth, and all these 200 what do you call them?
Watchers.
The watchers, but what are they called? God dang, I can't remember. The craters or whatever, the impact craters, right? There's 200 of them on Earth. And so this is where you get that idea of the third of fallen angels. Well, then you start thinking, well, he created the stars. Well, what is stars? Well, stars are they are plasma, and they are made out of hydrogen and helium, right? And so helium is a noble gas. And then you start getting into the idea of, well, what happens to if you dispersed a star? If a star fell from heaven and it dispersed, what would happen? Well, that noble gas would be released into the atmosphere, into the ether. So I think that noble gases are sort of a medium for these entities to inhabit and then come into our reality. I mean, because again, there's a lot of evidence that shows this is where, Jesus talked about at Mount Hermon of he built his church on top of Mount Hermon. Well, what's at Mount Hermon? Mount Hermon has a volcano. There's a volcanic lake, I think, or something along those lines there. And if you look around the world, all these different areas around the world where paranormal stuff is, there's heavy fault lines, volcanic seamounts, volcanoes, extinct volcanoes, all this other stuff. So you're going to get all kinds of paranormal activity from these different spots because there is a reason for that. All right. So the inside of these volcanoes and fault lines and fissures and all this stuff is inside the Earth's crust is what's called magnetite. And magnetite is encased in iron, right? This is where you get the idea of iron gates, the iron gates of hell. And if magnetite is encased in, it's like 75% iron. Iron grounds ethereal energy. And so inside of that magnetite is all sorts of noble gases. It's basically all the noble gases trapped inside of there. And every day when the sun comes up and the sun goes down, by the way, that's another indicator that of paranormal activity, sun coming up, sun going down, twilight zone, all this stuff. This is where you get the idea from. What happens, there's a change in the geophysical and the geomagnetic of the earth and the sun. Two permanent magnets, when they drag across each other, they create an electrical current. It creates a changing magnetic field, which creates an electrical current, right? So if two permanent magnets are sitting by themselves, you can't generate energy. But if they move along each other, then it will generate a current. And what that current does, I think, is unlocks that iron gate and releases those noble gases. And noble gases are chemically inert. They are non-reactive to other things. So this is a perfect vessel for them to come into our reality. So what happens is when the noble gases are released, they come out and they seep out through volcanoes and all this other stuff, and then they traverse the earth with these telluric currents, like I mentioned earlier, like the 33rd parallel. And telluric currents just means electrical current. So what you're getting is an electrical current that's coming out. And also, these noble gases sort of ride this electrical current. This is where you get the idea of serpents going along the earth, right? This is where you get snakes. Why you see snakes and the symbology of snakes and serpents and dragons and all this other stuff is because they're riding these currents, these electrical currents. And they come in through these portals. They come in through locations like Stonehenge and Avebury and all these different dolmens and passage mounds and all this other stuff. And the reason why they come in there is because what you get is they're usually at the intersection, these dolmens and all this, they're usually at the intersection of two Peterson currents, of two Telluric current energies. So, these things are flowing along the earth and then they meet up in this juncture, this junction, and then that energy kind of is swirling in one little place. And that's why they have stones there, is because the stones act as a capacitor, or they also act as a like a resonator, or they kind of encircle or entrap this electromagnetic energy. So what you have is you have a portal, which is like Stonehenge and pyramids and all these places. Then you have electrical currents coming in from both sides with these noble gases riding it, right? Well, one thing I meant to say was, like, when these noble gases come into the atmosphere, when they come into this reality has what I think we're encased in complex plasma, which is this hyper intelligent liquid that we can't see all around us all day long. Okay. So when they come out of the earth, they are kind of like, they turn into this complex plasma. And then that complex plasma rides that wave to that portal and then turns into an orb or what have you. and then it comes into our reality. And the best example I can give of this, of what I just said, is if you ever see the Jeremy Corbell UAP or UFO video out of Iraq, it's basically a jellyfish looking thing just flying. That's a complex plasma. So that would be like noble gases would be inside of that complex plasma. And so you have what's now a star. So essentially complex plasmas are stars that can inhabit Earth's atmosphere. So they're no longer beyond the firmament. They are in this, if that makes any sense. So they're basically like these blobs flying around looking for a portal to turn into an orb. And what happens when they turn into an orb? Well, these orbs are different colors, right? Purple, pink, purple, red, orange, blue, all this other stuff. And if you look at what happens when you burn a noble gas, they give off those colors as well. Like xenon gives off red, and argon gives off green, all this other stuff. Like they have different colors associated. I'm probably wrong in what I just said in terms of the colors, but matching up. But the colors I am right about that. They all give off different colors. This is like when you see a plasma ball, for example, has those purple lights and stuff. There's neon in there, and that so a plasma ball would be a good example of what I'm talking about with this etheric energy. So the dark matter. So if you look at a plasma ball and you see those purple tendrils, this is one you get from Spencer's. If you see those purple tendrils would be like us. It's the light, right? It's the light that connects. You could put your finger up there and it connects to another light, another node or whatever. But all that empty space that's in there, that's inside of that plasma ball, that's not purple tendrils, that would be the dark matter. That would be the dark energy that creates us. So it creates like a constrictive effect that creates that. I don't know how to explain this because this is a tough part, but essentially the light, what you're seeing when you see a purple tendril is a smaller scale of what the universe looks like. Because what that would be called, that purple tendril, is called a Birkeland current. And this is not the same as a Peterson current. The Birkeland current connects celestial bodies like Earth and the sun. And these Birkeland currents basically look like double helix DNAs. So what you're looking at is a double helix DNA when you're looking at a purple, one of those plasma balls or what have you.
Yeah.
And again, I think that humans are created, the light is created from that darkness, if you will, right? And that sounds crazy for a lot of people because people who are spiritual are like, no, there's no, but God created separately, God created light and darkness. So he's above all of this. And the darkness helps create the light, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I know I kind of got ahead of myself there with a lot of talking, but yeah, man, I think they come from these portals on Earth, or they come from inside the Earth in terms of like, they also come from the sky. Like I said, they come from fallen angels, from the plasma that fell to Earth. And they also are trapped. They are the demons and they are the fallen angels that are entrapped in this magnetite as like that's their pit prison.
Yeah.
And I think that every day, or maybe even every, we mentioned the All Souls Day and Dark Matter Day and all this stuff. Maybe that's the little season that everybody's always talking about. Maybe maybe it's daily, or maybe it's yearly, or like a half a year, right?
Maybe.
So I mean, again, I know it's a stretch, but again, there's not really any answers out there for any of this stuff anyways. So why not give my opinion and ideas on some
Absolutely.
stuff?
No,
anyway.
like I agree with especially like with the, when we get that mixing of light and dark, right? Just daily with the, and the theory of the watches, and the fourth watch being where the veil is the thinnest, right? And certain things can be seen because this transfer between light and dark, can make certain things illuminate, right? Like you're saying, with whether it's with the gases or just that we'll call it the veil gets thin at those times.
Well, the veil gets thin at those times for a reason, because at night at night, complex plasma is its densest, is its thickest.
At its thickest, right?
Yeah. So when the sun comes around and it electrifies that complex plasma that's in the sky, what you're looking at when you look up to the sky is you're seeing the blue. You're looking at the burn off of noble gases, the blue noble gases they're burning in the sky. You're seeing air glow, and so that's what you're looking at. You're not. That's why space. You can't see space during the day, and that's why it doesn't look black. Is because it's blue from being essentially from the plasma being electrified. So plasma is just a soup of free ions and electrons, or positive electrons, right? So you have basically a soup of like just stuff, just like dispersed. As soon as the sun comes down, as soon as the sun goes down, they all like quickly reform again.
Yeah.
And this is what is above us, and this is what the ionosphere is. People think that when we send when we point a satellite, you know how we used to have the old satellites when we had cable and stuff like that, or satellite a long time ago when we get 100 channels or whatever.
Yep.
That wasn't pointing up to space. That's actually pointing to the ionosphere. That hits the ionosphere and bounces off that and goes to a receiver somewhere. That's why when it rains and all this other stuff, storms, the storm is plasma, the lightning is plasma, and it causes all these
disruptions.
Disruptions in the so essentially, like I said, the ionosphere is the firmament. You can't go beyond that firmament, I don't think. That's just the bottom line, in my opinion. It's like that's a dense, complex plasma that you can't get beyond. And you can see that this is a complex plasma. They call it the ionosphere, but ionosphere just means plasma, essentially. And so yeah, there's a lot of evidence that, again, that shows that we don't go beyond the upper tier of the ionosphere. That's where the ISS is. It's not in space like people think. It's actually in the ionosphere, just at the tip top of that firmament, essentially.
Right.
So this is why I think a lot of this fake space is fake and all this other stuff. I really do believe that it's fake in the sense that we have been taught something different than what it is. I think the space is within us. There's all kind of, I've said this on Tinfoil Hat recently. You can look at like telescopes, for example. They have to be cryogenically frozen or cooled down just to be able to look into space. And what that means, in my opinion, is when something is colder, it has a slower vibration. So they're looking into the vibration around us that nobody can see. We're in this like the sliver of light, this 0.0035% of light. And there's 99% of darkness around us that we can't see. So God made us in this perfect visible light. And then all this other stuff is paranormal all around us. And I think that when we look into space, that's what we're looking into. We're actually looking, when you see all these James Webb telescope stuff, I don't think that they have a scope flying millions of miles away, taking pictures and sending. That's ridiculous to even suggest that. I think that what they're doing is they're using a telescope to cryogenically slow down the vibration so they can look into that space around us. They can look into the infrared around us, because what's in the middle of all of these telescopes is a reverse prism. And so I actually think that the ionosphere is a prism, if you will, and that the sun that you see, when God's light shines through the firmament, when it shines through that prism, it disperses us into the colors of light that we are. This is how refraction works. I got a prism here. And that light hits the prism and then spreads out. And this is where you get the colors of the rainbow and all this other stuff. This is what we are. We are human beings. We are light beings. We're color beings, right? And so this is where you get that idea from. But so when they use these telescopes, they have to they have to cool the scope down. And then they have a reverse prism inside of there that basically takes the color, compacts it into white light, and shines it through into the infrared so they can see what's going on beyond that. So when they're talking about Earth to space communications, there's at Mount Graham in Arizona, which is close to the 33rd parallel, they have an Earth to space communication center. This is what they're talking about. This is they're not who first of all, who are they communicating with in space? Like who realistically,
right.
who's in communicating in space at the Earth to space communication center? They in February 2001, they went to Congress, the FCC went to Congress and was like, hey, we need to get this 33 gigahertz signal for the Department of Defense. And they were like, well, what is it for? And they said, well, it's for Earth to space communications. So the 33 gigahertz signal that communicates with space, they needed specific DoD access to that. So nobody else outside of that can access that signal except for the Department of Defense. For what purposes, right? It's like, seems like they are communicating with something, some entities perhaps in that other world, in that upside down, in that dark matter. Because I think that dark matter and all of these complex plasmas are hyper intelligent. This is where you get the idea of non-human intelligence from. So they are supercomputers. Complex plasmas are supercomputers. So all around us all the time. This is why when people communicate, this is why if I'm thinking of you, all of a sudden you call, it's because that thing that connects us is, some people call it the ether, but it's complex plasma that we're in, and we are connected vibrationally through this complex plasma. We're animated by, we're swimming in it right now. The light animates us, but there's a scaffolding that exists for me to be able to do this, right? We don't, again, fish are in water. They don't know they're in water. So they just are like, oh, this is just Earth to me, or whatever it is. They're just kind of moving around.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what it is for us as well, is that we're sort of swimming in this hyper intelligent, non-human intelligence all around us, this complex plasma. And that is hijacked every single day by these demonic forces, these noble gases that come in through, they turn into complex plasmas when they hit the earth, and then they come into the portals once they hit those magnetic fields of the portals. Now, I didn't mention it before, but the portal locations, because you have two telluric currents meeting up at one spot, what happens is you have two electrical currents meeting up, and every electrical current creates a magnetic field, right? So when you have two electrical currents meeting up, what happens is it causes a separation in the electromagnetic. So in the electromagnetic field, it causes a minor separation, and that minor separation allows for as a portal space. Essentially, it allows for space and time to slow down. I had a girl from South Carolina. I'm going to be talking about it on my show later today, I think. She sent me a portal video yesterday, and it shows like a plasma, exactly what I'm talking about. It's like a pulsating light, and then it shows this thing just in a split, not even a split second, come out of this thing. So she sent me that, and that's actually real. I mean, I haven't verified it by any kind of scientific organization or anything like that, but she wouldn't just email me or message me and say, hey, check out this. She's just a normal person. She heard me on Tinfoil Hat, and she's just a normal person. So so I just saw that, man. And so it's nice to hear when people say what you talked about, what you're talking about with this plasma and these non-human intelligences and the noble gases, that resonates. I had a pilot reach out to me after I did Sam's show, and she said the same thing. She said, I have been searching for answers for many, many years about this. I had an experience where there was a UFO over a volcano in near Alaska when she was flying by, and the way she described it was like this telescoping thing coming from it that would look like it was connected to some kind of an energy or something. And so she said that when she heard what I was saying, she's like, I've never heard anybody say that, and I'm so glad to hear it because it makes so much sense. Why they're over volcanoes all the time, why it was happening at sunset and all this other stuff. And so I'm trying to put the pieces together for people with all this information. And to be honest with you, man, where would these things, if fallen angels were coming into our reality and they were coming in through these portals, well, these are the places that former civilizations, former humans would get this kind of information. This is why they build their temples there. This is why they go and meditate there still, is because when people go to these portal locations, they have transformational information downloads that come into them. So a lot of people, this is why Buddhist monks and all these people meditate at Mount Tibet or in Tibet and all this stuff at Mount Kailash. This is why all these people are obsessed with these locations is because there's electromagnetic energies there that they can tap into. And so they're getting information, they're getting forbidden knowledge from somewhere. And this forbidden knowledge is the fallen angels giving them this information. So if you walk through that spot, for example, 10,000 years ago, and all of a sudden you had an encounter with a glowing light, and this glowing light was like, I am your ancestor, your grandma, or whatever. I remember you as a kid, and yada, yada, yada. And they're telling them all this stuff. And the fallen angels would say stuff like, build this temple for me or whatever, and you can have access to me all the time. You can see me every day. And so that's what ancient peoples did. They built their cemeteries there. They built their churches there. They built their temples there. They built all these stone structures there because they wanted to interact with the dead. They wanted to interact with this,
altars, all of it.
They wanted to interact with, they thought that they were interacting with their loved ones. But what they were really interacting with is fallen angels. And fallen angels come in different packages. Throughout history, Greek and Romans, they call it Hermes, or they call it the Romans call it Mercury. And so what happens then is, this is where the pantheon of the gods would, got all their information. This is where if you go down to Sedona, JT follows JC and I were talking about this. He went down to Sedona and there's a statue of the Caduceus. And the Caduceus is a symbol of two snakes wrapping around a staff, right? Yep. And we have hijacked that modernly. We have hijacked that to use for the medical symbol, but that's not actually the medical symbol. That's actually a fallen angel symbol.
Yeah.
That's the symbol of Hermes. And that's what the statue Caduceus was marking in Sedona, which is on the 33rd parallel, which is a big vortex right there as well.
You can feel it in Sedona.
Yeah, exactly.
Period.
Because it's a heavy, again, fault lines and on fissures and all this stuff where all this electromagnetic energy is coming out of. As a matter of fact, a lot of these portals, what they talk about in Sedona, are coming out of like rocks. Like they're coming out of caves and things like that. This is where you get the idea of sulfur smells and all this other stuff.
Yep.
And so in Sedona, again, they have a statue of Hermes. And on the statue, they talk about, it's the passage, it's like Psalm 91, where it's the devil tempting Jesus, basically. So you have a fallen angel statue. It's a statue with wings and horn, with spikes on its head and all this other stuff. And then the snakes are wrapped around it. Well, again, those snakes represent electrical and magnetic fields. That's where electromagnetic energy comes from. So that's how it kind of ties into fallen angels. These fallen angels were using these portal locations to share forbidden knowledge with humans, essentially. But I think what happened was God flooded the earth because of that, because it was everywhere. These portals are everywhere, and he flooded the earth to cover up a lot of these portals, and he caused melting and all this stuff to melt a lot of these portals. And you can see evidence of that a little bit not a little bit. There's a lot of places that are off the coast of the United States, for example, these pyramids and all this other stuff that were covered up. They're basically under the ocean. There's a pyramid off the coast of Japan, for example. There's like massive temples there as well. And that's on the 33rd parallel as well, by the way. So you get a lot of this stuff, man, that's like, I think the Crusades happened to go finish off what God had started when he flooded the earth, to basically knock down all these portal locations and bury them like Göbekli Tepe and all this other stuff. And now I think that we're at a point where people are trying to rebuild and they're trying to refine these portals. And I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think people should be interacting with these portals whatsoever, because this is where you're getting forbidden knowledge. And oh, by the way, and I'll kind of end what I'm saying with that in terms of like, I know I'm talking a lot, but these crop circles are temporary temples. They're temporary versions of these dolmens and these Stonehenges and all the stone circles and menhirs and all this other stuff. So when you see crop circles, those were made by entities creating another portal for other entities to interact with. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I've never really thought about that either. But
yes. So that's what, but there, I talked to a woman named Karen Alexander, and she has a organization called Temporary Temples out of the United Kingdom, and she said the same thing about this is what happens when these crop circles are made, is they have the same effect as stone circles and all this other stuff. You could go meditate in them. You can go get downloads of information. Animals are always scared of these locations, all this other stuff. So
yeah, and people always say, like, when they go into them, they can feel things, right? Yeah, that's wild. I never really thought about that. I just wrote that down. So you're going to send me down a rabbit hole with that thing. That I'm already thinking about the craters. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, there's a Behringer crater in Arizona.
Yep.
Which is on the 33rd parallel as well. There are 200 of them. Just so happens to be 200 fallen angels that fell there. Right?
Yeah, right. So let me ask you, what do you think? I mean, so we talk about the forbidden knowledge, getting it from these areas, these portals where everything is happening. What about the Nephilim? Like, what do you think's going on there? Like, how did that happen? You know what I mean?
Well, I think they always are in this reality. They don't have to ride the plasma portals or
Right.
all that, they don't
How
have
does
to
that
turn
happen though? You know what I mean?
Well, I think that they're just dispersed energy, and they're negative energy. And so if you have a negative inclination, then I think that they can inhabit your body. They Jesus said this, they go around looking for rest and can't find any.
Yeah.
They're wandering in arid places and that kind of
Were
stuff.
they ever physical
Yeah,
beings?
I think so. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, there's a Nephilim.
yeah. So, I mean, I understand, like, that's what a demon is the basically disembodied soul of a Nephilim.
Yeah.
Allegedly, in essence. How did that, I'm just trying to piece the theory, you know what I mean? Together.
But fallen angels are different. Fallen angels fell to earth. They come out of these portals. They give forbidden knowledge. They teach people how to, excuse me again, I keep burping. I keep drinking Red Bull. That's why I'm burping so much. But they come out of these portal locations. They give forbidden knowledge. This is where you get the idea of Azazel giving all the information about cosmetics and all this other stuff, right?
Warfare,
weapons of war.
all the different
Hermes
things.
was a trickster, by the way. I mentioned Hermes, the god, the fallen, the Greek god Hermes. He was a trickster. They just keep changing names throughout history. These fallen angels,
right.
They come out. I think they're loosed every single day, possibly every single dark season, like I said earlier. But when they come out, they interact with humans in ways that are like, man, there's so much evidence of these things as fairy spirits and stuff like that, right?
Yep.
What people are saying fairies is because when they see them, they're little orbs of light, little balls of light flying around and stuff like that. This is where you get the idea of like tree nymphs and all this other stuff that Brian from Demon Erasers and I were talking about. So these are the sirens, and these are the alluring noises that you hear in the forest. These are the women crying that bring you in and all this other stuff. And then something happens where they abduct people or whatever, and they try to create hybrid beings. I think that they are continuously creating hybrid beings like the Nephilim that they did before the flood. They're still doing it because they keep, every time they come out of these portals, they try to, this is where you get the idea of abductions and all this other stuff.
Yes, correct.
They abduct
people. They're taking these people somewhere.
They're taking them somewhere, and then they're mating with them somehow. But there has to be blood matches and vibrational matches and all this other stuff. So that's the fallen angels. So I think that they're still creating Nephilim in a way. They're creating hybrids. But I don't think that those hybrids can inhabit Earth the same way that they used to before the flood. I think that they still exist in some other world somehow. I don't really know how to explain that.
And maybe that's the upside down, that theory, right? Of another dimension that exists parallel to ours, right?
Yeah,
or
parallel,
alongside it. So
and so when people are abducted, for example, and women are abducted, they get impregnated, and then many months later they get to see many years later they get to see their hybrid kid. And everybody always describes the hybrid kid as like stringy hair and big giant eyes and all this other stuff, right?
Karen Wilkinson.
Well, yeah, it's not just her. I mean, literally thousands and thousands of cases where people are talking about this, where they've been abducted a couple times, they were impregnated once, the baby was taken, and then they see a kid many years later and they introduce him, and they say that the kid acts the same way as like a normal teenager does here, which is really interesting. They're all like, "Ah, man, I don't want to see my mom," or whatever the case
Like,
is, you know. But I think that whatever is happening, the fallen angels are still creating or trying to create hybrids or Nephilim, because that's what Nephilim are. They're hybrid beings they mated with the daughters of men and created men of renown, which were the Nephilim. And
yes.
so God flooded the earth and killed all the Nephilim, but their spirit still remains. It wanders around, is wandering in arid places looking for rest. And that's why Jesus said you have to keep your house in order. If you tell the demons to get out and you clean your house up and all this other stuff, if you leave it empty, if you don't fill it with the Holy Spirit, then these things will come back sevenfold and they'll inhabit your body and make it worse. So
like these non-human entities, right? Let's call them that, fallen angels, whatever we want to call them, right? So we talked about the plasma. We talk about, like what for them though, what is the fuel? You know what I mean? Like, because we talk about the power of worship or like the power of fear or like an energy exchange of some sort. Have we thought about this?
what are you asking specifically?
So basically I'm like, what's the fuel? Like, you know what I mean? Like we're talking about worship, fear, energy exchanges between entities or whatever. I have a question, but it's like,
well, it's so what maybe what you're asking is like, there's an energy that exists. So they exist in this very slow vibrational realm. That's what the other world or the upside down or the dark, whatever world they live in, that's what it is. It's very slow.
gotcha.
And if you think about like what we live in a perfect temperature. It's like a frequency of like perfect temperature. Well, there would be every frequency of a wavelength would be super long. It would be the length of New York City. Our frequencies would be more like the length of a community, right? It's like, and theirs is like super long. When you have anything that's not going at a high vibration, it's going to be cold. So we're
Yes.
at a perfect temperature because we're steady, right?
Right.
Anything that's at a higher vibration, like ultraviolet rays and all this, UV rays, they're vibrating like, which makes them super hot. They makes them too hot to inhabit this earth. We're in this perfect temperature. So everything outside of that, outside of us, the slow vibration and the fast vibration, they want to get into our reality. But again, they can't. And so I think that the fuel for them would be to slow people's vibrations down so they can attach themselves to our vessels, if you will. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like if we're at a state of fear and anxiety and all this other stuff, we are very slow. This is why when you see people who are on drugs, they're like slouched
Yep.
over and humped over and everything, and they are like out of this world. They look demonic looking and all this other stuff because they're low vibration. There's not a lot of love in their life. There's not a lot of light. Love vibrates at 528 hertz. Fear vibrates at 4 hertz. So anything that they can do to keep you close to that vibration of fear and anxiety, they're going to keep you there. They're going to try to keep you away from love and light and all the stuff that
the higher frequency stuff.
Yeah, the higher frequencies, the Jesus stuff, right?
Yeah, right.
So
it's just a different way of looking at it, and whatnot. It's basically I'm kind of like stuck with this, like our non-human entities like crossing over, right? And what is giving them power?
I don't think they eat. They don't have food. They don't have food. They don't have anything. What gives them power is essentially they have all the power. They just don't have the things that we have in this world.
Right.
They don't have sex. They don't have food. They don't have games and all this other stuff that we have. So when they inhabit us, I think that they're living vicariously
they
through
relive
us.
that. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. That's kind of what I'm getting at.
So that's their fuel. I mean, hell would be super cold. And you know how when something is so cold it burns, like
Oh
you ever
yeah.
got a wart
Yes.
frozen off or something like that?
Absolutely.
So hell would be very, very, very cold and dark and nothing there, right? There's no
Yeah.
light
Well, the
whatsoever.
absence of God.
Yeah, it's the absence of light, right? They have nothing there. It's cold, it's dark, it's miserable. They get no rest, all this other stuff. And so I think that they want to inhabit this earth because they can see us all the time. They exist in the world around us and they can see us, but we can't see them. They're imperceptible to us. So I think that they are jealous of us. They see all the stuff that we can do and it's great to them. And so they want to do that. They want to be in this light. But I think again, that's something that will never happen. Even if they try to create hybrids and all this other stuff, that's never going to happen. It's not going to be allowed anymore. And so I think that
Right.
so I mean, I don't know, man. That's just my theory on it again. I just think that they are living in that dark world and they want us to misery loves company, right? They want us to be
Yeah.
miserable
Right.
and then they want to inhabit our vessels because what happens when they do inhabit a body, whenever these fallen angels are able to, or these Nephilim spirits, for example, are able to inhabit a body, what did they do? Well, they were men of renown. They were kings of this and they were the prince of Persia and they were the king of Tyre and all this other stuff, right? It's like, well, when they get back into a human body, they want to do those same things. This is why you get people who are, who want power and money and control and all this other stuff, is because they are probably possessed with some sort of a Nephilim demon that is making them want more of that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So these were all the Greek gods. Remember, like
Yeah.
all these Hermes and all these, they're Greek gods, and so they were worshipped in a way. They were
Well,
again men of
you have
renown.
like so much crossover between the pantheons, right? So you have like Zeus, but there's crossover with Baal. There's crossover with Zeus.
Well, I think they're
Zeus.
all the same.
Yeah, exactly. They're the same entity. And
Yeah.
then even like Thor. So the thunder gods, right? And it's kind of funny how the thunder gods, that it's plasma, right? That's the
Right.
we talk about lightning being plasma. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's always iron references, like I mentioned earlier, to grounding ethereal energies. This is iron crosses, right? When you're fighting against vampires or whoever, iron gates at a cemetery to trap the spirits in. This
Yep.
is iron really has this effect that I heard. I have a friend, my mom's friend that she grew up with. She was telling me that she was married to, or she is married to still, a Native American man, and he always talks about all these things all the time. But she said that they had this iron bed with all these iron things underneath it, and then a spirit got trapped or something under there, and it was just going crazy in there.
Wow.
And because they had a lot of ghosts and all these other different things that were at the house, and she said somehow this thing, whatever it was, got trapped in there, and you could just hear bing, bing, bang, 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 bang. And I think that
Yeah.
that's real, man. I think there's something to the fact that Jesus said he'll lock the gates of hell with his church, right? With the people of us who are, again, who are made in God's image. Excuse me, made in God's image, and we're light beings, and light repels the darkness, right? So anytime you say the name of Jesus, anytime you shine a flashlight or whatever, like you can see a ghost or a demon or whatever right in front of you. You just take a flashlight and cut it on, it'll disperse. You say the name of Jesus, it'll disperse. That's because there's power in the name of Jesus, because Jesus is light. God is light, and light annihilates the darkness. And so when God says that he's going to build his church on top of the gates of hell, we are the gate. Essentially, we are that iron gate that locks them in, if you will. And so it's again, I just not a lot of people talking about this stuff.
Not like this.
Right. There's not a lot of people talking about this at church or school or
No,
anything like
not at
that.
all.
And
Not at all.
but I think people understand that there's something more going on. There's something beyond us. And even if I'm not exactly right, I think that at least I'm getting into the ballpark of like, what's going on. I feel like I'm close to CERN has particle collider. What is a particle collider? They're colliding matter and antimatter to try to create. They're trying to recreate life. This is why, again, they celebrate Dark Matter Day and all this other stuff. So they wouldn't have a whole underground system dedicated to trying to recreate life and recreate all this stuff. And then you hear stories about portals opening and terrible demonic voices and
Well, I
screaming and
mean,
all this other
there's
stuff.
outside CERN, there's a statue of Shiva,
Exactly.
the destroyer god, one
Yeah.
of the destroyer gods, right? Not that
So-
it's one, but it's a one. What about, so with this saying, see, you got my brain moving because I've never thought of it this way, right? How things get transported and how things are, you know, I guess I never really thought about the way that it all moved or that the way that it actually worked, right? Does that make sense? So it makes me think of things like Bigfoot, Dogman, shadow figures, because I just did an episode on shadow figures, and it's talking, part of that was because I did a lot of research on the way we actually see, besides the wavelengths of light, but how much of what we see is actually fabricated within our own mind, right? Because we have a delay in what our brain kind of puts together of what we're actually seeing. So this is why you'll see things in the periphery, and as soon as you look at them, they're either dispersed or they're just not, you just don't see them anymore, right? So it makes me think like that as like these beings behaving more like interdimensional spillover than like biological creatures, you know, things like that.
Yeah, they're not. I don't think they're biological. I think what happens is when they come into this, I mean, I didn't mention the plasma portals portion of this. I don't know if I've talked to you since I started talking about plasma portals, but essentially what that is again, they turn into complex plasma every day. These magnetite energies, these noble gas energies, they turn into plasma. They interact with a magnetic field, which is the portal location that I talked about. And then they morph into a ball of light. Now, how that happens is essentially there's a guy named Winston Bostick who was studying plasma and magnetic fields and all this other stuff. He accidentally shot a plasma into a magnetic field and it turned into a halo, a golden ring of light that was flying all over the place. And he was like, what in the world is this? So he started shooting a bunch of them at each other and they were forming little orbs of light. And they would turn into orbs of light and they would just fly all over the place. And they were transmedium. They would fly through walls and they would fly out of the building and all this other stuff. And so quickly the government came in and snatched him up, said, nope, you're going to be working for us. And so 50 years, they didn't hear from him again. But, so what he discovered though, and this is talked about in a book called A New Science of Heaven by Robert Temple, was the fact that plasma, when it interacts with a magnetic field, it electrifies, it becomes an orb of light. Well, that orb of light, it then has its own magnetic field. So it's flying around and it's looking for, in my opinion, putrefied ions to shape shift into something that whatever's available. So like if there's a portal in the snow, it's going to look like a Yeti.
Yeah.
If it's in the swamp, it's going to look like some kind of a swamp creature, right? Some kind of a lizard or half deer, half bear, some kind of a stinking.
Some kind of thing, right?
Yeah, remember it stinks. It's like every time you interact with a cryptid or people interact with a cryptid, it has a terrible smell to it. And I think that's because when something dies, its energy is kind of dispersed into this plasma existence that we have all around us. It's kind of sitting there, right? It's a bunch of putrefied ions of dead animals that just decomposed and kind of get stuck into this plasma. Then these orbs of light are flying around and it's like pulling all this stuff and then forming into something, and then it comes into our reality. So they're not really organic in the sense of like we are organic. We're born here. Right. We have plasma in the blood and all this other stuff. We're born here. They're not organic. That's why they can shapeshift into everything else. That's why they morph and that's why they disappear and all this stuff.
Yeah, is because walk into portals or almost inevitably, not all the time, but a lot of the time, especially at night, Bigfoot or Dogman encounters are either accompanied by orbs, or you'll find them later, like on camera or something like that. Like you'll see orbs. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and listen, this isn't like I might be
No,
way off, but I think
but
that
it's
there's
a
something to
great
all of it.
theory. Great
Yeah,
theory.
there's something to all of it for sure because they go hand in hand. Orbs, you see orbs whenever you see, what are they called? The skinwalkers and stuff like that. They'll see orbs and then all of a sudden they'll see a wolf appear or
Yeah,
whatever the case
right.
is.
I know with my experiences with Bigfoot, which are direct experiences, both were happening at sunset.
Right.
And
Water flowing nearby, volcanoes.
water flowing by
Right.
both. And then the other one, the both times I had that awful smell, that like swamp, putrid. It's like a mix between decomp and, yeah, it's exactly.
It's also the gas that you're smelling too, that noble gas that I
Yeah,
mentioned. So you're
burn
smelling,
off.
you're smelling gas burn off as well as the putrefied remains of something that had died that they have formed into something, you know?
Okay, I like
So
it. I
yeah, I
just
can
like
do
it.
a,
Yeah. No, I heard you on an episode talk about this. Now that I'm thinking back in the Rolodex, and I thought it was awesome. So
well, so in my opinion, man, like I can write a profile on these things. I can tell you exactly where things are going to happen. I can tell you how to make these things come into existence. All you got to do is get some bluestone and create a circle. This is why a lot of witches and stuff like that create circles with stones.
yep.
And
And when you say bluestone, you mean the actual like slate bluestone,
yeah,
right? Yeah,
limestone,
yeah,
whatever has bluestone in it, that
right.
kind of stuff. Yeah, I'm talking about like literal rocks. And you know what's funny? What got me on this path of thinking was before anything else was I was watching like Skinwalker Ranch, and I think that they tell you a lot in that show, but not enough to obviously make you go, "What is this?"
Yeah,
But they do have some secrets, and there's like chants and stuff that can open up these portals. There's vibrations that you can do. There's encampments and all this other stuff that you can vibrationally. This is where the Indians go, oh, that's a
yeah,
vibration, and that
yep.
vibration holds the portal open a little bit longer for something to come through. And I was watching Skinwalker Ranch, and I saw this rabbi come on there, and they had him on. He was going to say something, some kind of an incantation or something, and on a microphone with loudspeakers and all that. And he said, "Well, but first, and let me do this." And he put a bunch of stones around him in a circle. And that's what I think is doing. He was opening a portal. He was allowing a place where these rocks, where this energy can form into like a little, encircle it or whatever, into a little vortex, and these things can come through. So,
Yeah, the
so
plasma. Yeah,
yeah. So
wow.
this is why you see this is why they're transmedium, dude. A lot of people don't really understand what that is. They're transmedium because they can just fly through walls and volcanoes, and you see them on Skinwalker Ranch. They just disappear into the mesa and all this other stuff. It's because they're transmedium. They are not material of this world. They are inorganic. They're light in some not light, but gases in some way. They're complex plasmas. So you can't see complex plasma. You can't see plasma around us at all. When plasma is dispersed, the only way you can see it is whenever it has a burn off. And again, we walk through this plasma, right? That means that all this plasma around us is transmedium. If we can walk through it, then that means these things that form into it can go through walls and all this other stuff. So it is transmedium.
Yeah,
But yeah, I can tell you volcanoes, fissures, water flowing. This is where you can go down to like a stream in the mountains. And I was talking to Doc Brown about this actually, and he said that they had just went out to film the documentary that he was making.
Operation Smoke.
Yeah. And did you go to that or something?
No, I wasn't. I got invited, but I couldn't go. I was bummed.
Well, so they filmed that, and he said whenever I was talking to him about this on his show, he was like, dude, it was so funny, man. It's like we were right beside water when we had this experience, and there was like a fire or something where they had a bunch of stones or something like that
Yep.
around it. I think that's what he said. I can't remember exactly, but he said that we had an experience and it was near water and it was near stones and all this other stuff. And I was like, yeah, you could pretty much probably do
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
in some small way. So for people who are out there listening, like who are Bigfoot hunters, I I'm not telling you what to do, but and I don't suggest doing it actually. I don't believe in necromancy and all that stuff.
No,
I'm
that's
encouraging you not to
wild.
do it.
Yeah.
But that would be the way to do it. I think that if you wanted to do something like that. And I think that there are probably good people in the government who, I know it sounds like an oxymoron, but there are probably good people in the government who are working to prevent more of these portals being open and stuff like that. I think that they can probably detect that. They probably have some kind of a detection way in the military. When we were overseas, we had this system called TAS, right? Where you could,
Yeah. No, I know it.
yeah, right. So you can see when mortars are coming across the fence and all this other stuff. So it's like a heat signature almost. And I think that they probably have that. And so if you were to do anything like that, I bet that the government would probably quickly jump on you
Yeah.
and, disperse it, arrest you, whatever the case is. But I do think that there's probably good people working on the side of the light, but I also believe that there are people who are working with these entities and giving them forbidden knowledge. And these entities are giving them forbidden knowledge in medicine and
Right.
technologies and nuclear war and all this other stuff. Tucker talks about this stuff a lot openly now.
Yeah. Now
And
he
he said
does.
that what changed his mind about it was somebody from inside the government had essentially talked to him about it and told him what was going on. So I think it's interesting now. I was talking about this, and a lot of people in this world are talking about something similar way before Tucker was. We were already on top of it with angels and demons and that kind of stuff. So I
Yeah.
do think that there are angels that are, if they're demons, they're probably angels that are working. But I think that they work in a different way. They are stars, kind of, they are heavenly bodies that look after Earth in different ways. I don't think that they ever come and interact with us. I don't think that they are interacting with Chris Bledsoe and all this other stuff. That's just
Yeah.
my
No.
personal opinion. I think that maybe they are, and maybe, but I think that they protect us in different ways. They only jump in whenever they need to jump in, kind of a thing.
Right.
I don't think that they appear and say, "Oh, I am an angel of light here from the planet Pleiadian, and I'm here
Yeah. Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
all this other
Please.
stuff." Yeah, which
I
you
just
hear a lot
know
of.
that I just know that where we go in Pennsylvania, again, the times, I mean, it's kind of like you know that certain stones have certain types of energies and frequencies, right? And we're kind of alluding to this type of stuff. So I'm just thinking of whenever we have encounters, right? There, what we're actually doing, and the times that we have the most encounters, we're sitting around a campfire, right?
Yeah,
And it's almost like I I almost get the feeling that they want to, like, whatever's there wants to join us. Does that make sense?
yeah. I mean, you're creating stone. Sometimes you're creating a stone
No, it
fire.
is a stone circle.
Yeah, you're
Absolutely. We
yeah,
have stones around and a lot of them are bluestone.
yeah,
From, um,
and plasma in the fire as well. So like
yeah,
you're almost because I believe argon. There's a lot of argon and stuff like that in fire. I could be
yeah.
wrong about that, but
But either way, it's almost like these things want to join us or want to be closer to that fire or you know what I'm saying? It's definitely weird experiences that we have, whether it's, you know, orbs or things like that, which we've had in that location multiple times. Different colored orbs, red, blue, green.
yeah. Let
It's
me
just
let
got
me
me, it's just got my brain twisting on what exactly we're seeing here, right? So,
let me look something up.
um,
So color of noble gases is like there's a purple color for. Oh, hold on one second. I'm sorry for the dead air. So helium is a purple color, and
no worries.
neon is it's like a red, sometimes a purple. Argon is a purple. Um, Krypton is white, which is there's a whole tie into Superman there that you can go into if you wanted to. And then xenon is like a blue. So when these are the typical colors you see white, you see purple, you see blue, you see orange. And
Yeah.
honestly, people have, like, I think George Knapp said something about them being different. Like some of the colors are nicer, right? Some of the orbs of light that you see are orange or mean. I think he calls the orange meanies or something like that. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah, man. So it's all interesting, but I think there's a lot there to it when it comes to fire and circles and incantations and all this other stuff. And I think this is why it's incredibly important for us to have Jesus in our life, because he's the only light. He's the only way. He's
Yeah. Because what I
the
was getting at with this is that I bless the area. And if I don't, different things happen. But when I do bless the area and use, I bless the area, and the I guess you would call it, experiences that we have are always beyond that, like henge that I create, I guess you could say, to an extent. It's
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
it's
that's
weird.
what I had Topher Gardner on my show, and he said that, to mix urine with biochar, and you can put it in around your property, and you can walk circles around your property over and over, just praying, and you're praying like a spiritual boundary that these things can't inhabit. But I do that also by whenever I literally pray. I pray over our house. I pray over my kids. I pray
Yeah.
over the property. I play, you know what I mean? I pray
Same.
over all this stuff so I can create like little boundaries, little spiritual
Yeah.
boundaries that these things
I
can't
use
get in.
anointing oil and all the things. So
Dude, these things are real.
yeah.
This energy around us is incredibly real. I had some dowsing rods, and I went out into my yard one day, and because somebody told me you could use dowsing rods to find water, and I thought it was really cool. I was like, all right, let me go check out this. This wasn't but like a year and a half ago, whatever. And I went out in the yard, and we just built our house, so I knew that there was a pipe where the water pipe was, where it was connecting from the road to the house. And so I put out the dowsing rods, and they were copper, and I walked over the top of where the pipe was, and it crossed. I was like, oh, that's crazy. It
Yep.
actually works. It's telling you where something is hidden, where something is buried. And so I did it a couple more times. It worked every single time. And then I asked my son to do it, and he did it, and it worked. And then I was holding them, and my son said, oh, these things are demonic or whatever. And I was like, maybe, and I was kind of laughing at him and stuff. And then,
Yeah.
so I stood with these things, and I was looking at the house with them, and the water is to my left. And I said, where is the water? And these things went, and it pointed over to the left.
Yeah.
Crazy, dude. And so I immediately was like, I prayed. Because if I invited that in, I wanted to get it off my property.
Well, there's these girls, and it's mainly women that I see on TikTok, they're talking to entities like crazy, and that's what it is with the yes and the no. I mean,
yeah. And
I have some somewhere. I don't know where they're at, but either way, I don't touch them anymore. It's
I threw them away, dude. I was like, I don't want nothing to do with this.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Yeah, man. I think you have opened a lot of portals today.
Hopefully not. No, I don't encourage anybody.
Portals in people's minds for sure. I know you have in mind, like sparked it, and I just take notes. So, my goodness.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't encourage anybody to build a stone circle or anything like that. I think we do it probably without knowing. Like some people create little gardens in their house with these stone circles around it and stuff like that. And what do they usually have in the middle of the stone circle? An angel holding up a little bat of water and all this. The concrete, the little concrete bird baths and stuff like that. And you'll see statues of angels and stuff like that. And I just think that because this is where the idea. So what Winston Bostic, what he talked about was that they all came in at right angles. Every time the plasma was shot into the magnetic field, they would come in at right angles. And so I think that this is where you actually get the name angels from, is because they're coming in at right angles. And there's a lot of people who have talked about this over the years. There's a guy named Bruce Cathy who's talked about angles. They can only make right angle turns and stuff like this. So I think that's another interesting tidbit of information. So you get the halo, which is, by the way, when you shoot a plasma into a magnetic field, it becomes a toroid. A plasma toroid is called a plasmoid. So
Yeah.
what you're getting when you see a halo of light, that's a plasmoid. Multiple plasmoids turn into an orb. Okay, so multiple plasmoids together form an orb. And there's a lot of video evidence from last year on Instagram and all this stuff where people are looking at, and you can see this in real time. You can see it forming into an orb in real time. So I think that the halo, the idea for a toroid is a donut. It's like a
Yeah.
glowing donut. So maybe the idea for angels comes from that. It's a halo and they coming in at an angle. And again, there's no evidence to that other than just me saying that. But that's an interesting thing to note, that they all come in angles and they're called angels, and
Yeah.
there's all these depictions of them with wings, and there's these depictions of snakes wrapped around them and all this other stuff. So,
Hmm. I
it's
mean,
an
if you think about us too, we have a toroidal field around us.
Yeah, we do. Our
Yeah.
hearts, our brains,
Yep.
they generate electricity, and we have a electrical field around us from
About 3 feet. And
it's actually like a magnetic field, because our hearts and our
right.
brains are electrical. They're generating electrical energy, and it creates this black body radiation, which is like a magnetic. It's like a very weak magnetic field. But it goes back to the idea that you can, like attracts like, and all this other stuff. Like, you can, if you're thinking bad things, you're going to get bad things. If you're
It's
thinking
also one
positive.
of the reasons that I think during, 2020, 2019, 2020, the deal was to stand 6 feet apart.
Yep.
That puts us just outside our fields touching.
Exactly. They don't want those fields intertwining.
Correct.
I think that they know that something's going on,
Right.
where we're starting to wake up at a very fast rate now. Like, they can't stop it anymore. I think that we are in sort of a great awakening, if you will. But I think that awakening is a realization that God is real, that Jesus is real, and that I don't know what. I'm not one of those people who are like, oh, the end times are near and nothing like that. But I feel like something is changing. There's a changing atmosphere around us. Everybody's waking up. Everybody wants truth. Everybody wants authenticity. And that's the only thing that I can ever equate to my show, as in terms of, like, why is my show successful? Why is it more successful than somebody who's been doing this for 8 years or whatever, in terms of getting more downloads and listeners and all this other stuff? And the only thing I can think is that I am being authentic whenever I talk, because I think authenticity resonates with people. I think we can quickly see through BS now, like we never were before.
So
when
I
you watch
wonder if,
TV and stuff.
you bring up the magnetic stuff too, right? And that our planet or something's going on magnetically, right?
Yes.
So whether you believe we live on a globe or we live on a whatever, something's going on magnetically. And the fact that we're able to see like auroras and stuff in the sky at lower and lower latitudes than ever before is kind of hearkening to the fact that something's changing.
Something is. Now, what that is, I don't really know. I don't even like to kind of speculate on that, because I feel like every time somebody does that, it's just, they make a fool of themselves. This time is going to be the end day, and that time is.
I
get
think
a lot of
as
people
long
on my
as you're
show.
not picking dates.
Right. It does feel like something's changing, and I don't know what that is.
Yeah, agree.
And I actually feel like it changed in 2020. There was something happened. I was out in my yard one day, and I really felt this weird something. I don't know how to describe it, but I went inside and I told my wife, I was like, I don't really understand this, but something's different. Something changed. Something happened. I don't know what happened. And so it's interesting that 2020, we always say hindsight 2020. I feel like maybe 2020 was the start of something different and something new, and that we're moving towards something else, whatever that means, whether that's a shifting, maybe that's a splitting of the worlds, maybe that's a whatever, shifting realities, going to new timelines. I don't know what it is, but it feels like we had some sort of a shift. And especially for a lot of people, 2020 was the kind of exploded everybody onto the scene of like, oh, something. This is why I don't think they try to shadow ban a lot of people anymore. I mean, they still do, but it's not to the extent that it was in 2019 and 2020 and 2021, because I
And a
don't think
lot
you
of
can
times it
stop it.
doesn't work.
Yeah, it just makes things worse and worse and
Yeah.
bigger, and people get bigger. You can ban Nick Fuentes or whoever you want, but they're just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they'll never go away. So I think that they realize they can't do anything about this. This is why a lot of people are preparing. I think a lot of these CEOs are prepping for something, and I don't think that it's the end of the world. I think that we're shifting into an age of authenticity, that people are going to start demanding better from these people. They're going to start demanding, why do you have all these resources when everybody else doesn't? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Why do you
for
get to have
sure.
all the land and nobody else gets to have all the land? So I think we're in that age of authenticity where people are waking up and they want answers, and they're going to be basically banging on these people's doors going, we want accountability. We know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Brad, I don't want to cut us off, but I kind of have to.
That's fine, dude.
Tell everybody where they can find you again.
Yeah, you guys can find me at theawakenedpodcast.com. That's the easiest way. I got a website. I mean, I pay for it every month, so might as well get some use out of
Please
it.
use it.
Yeah. But really it's not, it's only just a landing pad of information where you can find my links. It's basically a glorified link tree. So
It's a fancy link tree, right?
yeah. Yeah. So if you want a little bit more information on me, maybe you want to come on the show or something like that, hit me up through there. Maybe you have some stuff you want to share with me, like plasma portal stuff. I get people email me after these episodes all the time. So that would be really cool. I love seeing videos and hearing stories. I get all kinds of emails about stuff like that, and I love it because it helps me connect the dots on certain things. And I'm also able to help others with their journey figure out what this is or what that is. So if you're hearing something today about Bigfoot and you had a weird smell or you saw orange light or whatever, maybe those dots, maybe I can connect those dots for you a little bit more and get you on the rabbit hole of finding out what these things are. Because I'm still learning. It's a journey. I don't think we're ever going to know everything, but I'm at least trying to find answers. And I don't think there's a lot of people out there who are doing that. So
yeah, for sure.
Sorry about my phone. Keep going.
Oh, no worries. All right, Brad. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And thank you for always supporting everything I do. You're retweeting and sharing everything. I appreciate that, man.
Absolutely.
Or not retweeting, but liking and sharing things on Instagram.
Rising tides, they raise all ships.
Right.
All right, man.
All right, buddy. See ya.
Searching for a place to feed. Plasma ripples in the sky, bending time where angels die. Entities behind the frame, calling out your hidden shame. Fear is fuel, they drink it slow. Every tremble helps them grow. Truth is locked in frequency. Guard the light inside of me. They want the worship, they want the dread. Don't let the voices live in your head. I keep my faith.